You're listening to the planet's memory, where time breathes and the Earth remembers. What if the ocean once held the sky in its depths, clouds folded into currents, winds woven into salt, before the world had names, before the sea and the sky had been split by line or horizon? There was only breath, a breath so vast and slow it could be mistaken for silence, and in that silence, the planet stirred, still glowing from its birth, still soft with heat, still listening to the stars from which it came. The hydrogen born from the furnace of collapsed giants floated freely in the dark. Oxygen, coaxed from ancient minerals and volcanic exhale, waited beneath molten stone. When they met, not in fury but in calm, the oceans began to fall from the sky, drop by glowing drop. Rain came, not as storms, not yet, but as mist, as veils of breath descending on cooling crust. The atmosphere condensed its longing, and the sea began its descent, not as a stranger, but as a memory returning home. It was the sky's first forgetting, and the ocean's first remembering. No continents yet, only crusts cracking like eggshells, magma whispering beneath the weight of water, steam coiled upward, returning to cloud, forming the earliest rhythms of evaporation. The cycle began up and down, warm and cool, rise and fall. The ocean and the sky learning to trade places in endless exchange, and from that exchange, chemistry unfolded, hydrogen atoms drifting into bonds, oxygen finding partners, salts from rock, carried by heat and current, dissolved into newborn seas. Each reaction a soft rehearsal for life. Though life would not come for a long time, still the elements practiced, and repeated, across eons too long for counting. Water carried iron from the earth's deep wounds. Winds brought carbon from ash and stone. Volcanoes whispered heat. And the sea responded in minerals and drift. And all the while, the ocean listened. It listened to the lightning that danced above it, to the winds that circled its surface. The ocean was never still, even in its infancy. It moved not with rage but with memory, as if the sky was still echoing through it. Eventually oxygen began to rise, bubbled into the air from unseen depths, released by early microbes that breathed with light. Sky and sea were now entangled by something new, photosynthesis, a quiet miracle unfolding in tidal pools and shallow blue. Not lightning, not thunder, but cells that exhaled the future. And yet the ocean still carried the past, salty with ancient minerals, heavy with volcanic sighs. Above, the sky thinned and brightened, turning blue as more oxygen gathered. But below, the sea remained the archive. Everything that had fallen stayed. It held the weight of all things lost, the heat of the early earth, the dust of fallen meteors, the gases once wrapped around molten stone. The ocean became the first library, each molecule a word in the long story of breath. Even today, its salt is not just taste, it is record. Each grain a relic of rock dissolved, mountain erased, river wandered, to drift in that water. Even now, is to float in the memory of when sky and sea were one. And if you listen not with ears but with stillness, you can feel it in the tide's rhythm, in the hush between waves, in the way the ocean sometimes looks like the sky inverted, as if remembering what it once was. And yet, if this much can be forgotten, what else might still be dreaming beneath us? From that wondering hush, the sky answered again, this time in rain, but not the wild downpours we know today, not thunder chasing lightning across darkened plains. No, this was the earth's first rain, and it fell gently, as if it too was listening. Each drop descended through a sky thick with carbon and memory, falling for miles in slow spirals of heat and mist. Molten stone hissed beneath it, steam rising in ribbons that danced like breath. And in that meeting, soft rain, hot crust, something ancient began. Not erosion, not yet, but attention. The earth began to feel itself. Basalt cooled beneath each touch. Minute fractures formed where the heat surrendered. The rock cracked, not from violence but from presence. Water, in patient repetition, began carving grooves that would one day be valleys. It did not rush, it listened, and in that slow listening, it taught the world how to yield. These early rains fell for millions of years, an age of vapor and cloud, where oceans had not yet found their basins, and rivers did not yet know where to run. But still the sky emptied itself, still the rain came. Drop by drop, it softened the unsoftened. It cooled the wildness of Earth's fire-born skin. It found weaknesses in the stone and made them gentler. It hollowed without harm. This was the first erosion, not destruction but remembering, for each drop that struck the ground was carrying a message. You are not finished, and the earth in its vastness heard that message. It let itself be shaped. Through cracks and channels, the rain began to gather. It whispered into low places, pooled in hollows, sought darkness. Over time these pools became mirrors, reflecting the same sky that had released them. A loop had formed. Sky to rain, rain to rock, rock to pool, pool to cloud, and all of it was listening. From this soft persistence, landscapes began to unfold, not in a day, not in an age, but in the long rhythm of listening. Rain spoke, stone answered, and between them, the shape of the world began to emerge. Still today, we can hear that dialogue in the hush of a drizzle on leaves, in the rush of flood carving canyons, in the weight of clouds before a storm. It is the language of water, patient, repetitive, alive. It speaks not in volume but in return, in cycles, in seasons, in the silence between raindrops. There are ancient basalt cliffs in Greenland, black stone, billions of years old, still bearing the faint impressions of the first rains, tiny pocks, shallow dimples, not from meteorites, not from time, but from listening. And beneath those marks, isotopes tell the truth, that even before life, the planet was already practicing memory. Water recorded its journey in chemistry. Oxygen isotopes changed as clouds moved. Hydrogen ratios shifted with temperature. Each rain, a chemical note passed between sky and earth. It is how we know the world once burned. It is how we know the rains fell, even before rivers. It is how we know the world, even now, remembers. To walk in rain is to be touched by the same sky that once fell on magma, the same sky that listened, the same water that whispered the world into shape. And yet, if the first rains could teach stone to feel, what else might still be listening beneath the silence? It was not long in Earth's deep rhythm before the world began to fold in on itself, not as collapse but as breath, a slow seismic inhalation. The crust began to move, and from that silence, the planet took its next breath. Where one plate met another, tension did not explode. It bowed, it yielded, it dove. Subduction, the great descent, slabs of ancient seafloor, heavy with memory, salt from forgotten tides, silt from vanished rivers, the quiet skeletons of plankton, slid beneath younger crust like pages turning in stone. An ocean's worth of time pulled downward inch by inch into heat, into darkness, into pressure. But memory never truly ended there, because subduction is not forgetting, it is transformation. The basalt of seafloors, buried by gravity's hand, carried water with it, trapped between minerals, hidden in cracks, folded into clay. As it descended, that water began to whisper. It softened the rock, bent it, broke it open, and the earth pressed from below began to rise. Mountains are not born from the sky down, but from the ocean up. What we see as peaks, snow-dusted, vast, still, are exhalations of an ancient underwater breath. They carry the salt of submerged continents, the chemistry of drowned ecosystems, the pressure of millennia. Even the Andes, even the Himalaya, they began in silence, at the edges of plates where the earth remembered how to fold. In those buried depths, where temperatures rise past 700 degrees, minerals metamorphose, shales become schist, limestone turns marble, even time takes new form, and fossils once soft and detailed are blurred, not erased but absorbed into the texture of stone. These are the vaults of memory, pressed shut, and yet the breath continues. Volcanoes emerge at the edges of these zones, fire pushed up from where plates dissolve. Their ash carries what the ocean once held, trace elements, carbon, ghosts. The same rain that carved basalt is now steam, rising in plumes reborn in eruptions. Even now we find marine fossils at the tops of mountains, seashells sleeping on Everest, crinoids in the Alps, proof that the earth does not forget. It simply repositions its past. This is the breath of subduction, an inhale of ocean, an exhale of sky. It is slow but constant. Plates drift at the speed fingernails grow. Yet across deep time they sculpt empires. Whole oceans have disappeared this way, swallowed into trenches, recycled into magma, risen again as granite peaks. And what of the water? Some is locked away forever, sealed in olivine or peridot deep in the mantle. Some escapes released in superheated bursts through volcanic vents. Some returns to the atmosphere as vapor, joining the clouds once more. A cycle deeper than weather. A cycle written not in days or seasons but in the breathing of the planet itself. If we could listen not just with instruments but with the patience of stone, we'd hear that breathing even now. The rumble of an earthquake far beneath our feet, the slow rise of a mountain range, the hiss of hydrothermal vents whispering salts from a world we no longer see, and in all of it, memory. Because to subduct is not to disappear, it is to be reshaped, to press time into new forms, to turn oceans into sky. And yet, if the earth can breathe oceans into mountains, what else might it be carrying in silence, still waiting to rise? It was still the same dream, only deeper, for even as plates shifted and seas sank, the sky was still falling, but not as rain. This time it came as life. In the soft light of shallow oceans, invisible cities began to bloom, billions of drifting bodies, microscopic, translucent, weightless, rising and falling with the rhythms of light, plankton, diatoms, coccolithophores, each one a quiet architect of the future. They drank sunlight and breathed out oxygen, tiny lungs for a world still shaping itself. And when their time ended, sometimes in hours, sometimes in days, they descended like dust, a gentle snow, not of ice, but of bodies, shells made of calcium, pulled from the sea, shaped by the chemistry of the air. They were the fossils of the sky, minute and weightless in life. But in death, they gathered weight. They settled layer upon layer upon layer, until the seafloor became their page. And what they left behind, those chalky fragments, those whispered exhalations, became limestone. Not just stone, but memory. A diary kept in sediment. Each layer tells us how bright the sun once was, what gases thickened the atmosphere, which winds carried nutrients across oceans. Even the quiet revolutions of Earth's orbit are written in the fine striations of limestone cliffs. In these stones, we find the outlines of time, 1,000,000 years captured in a meter, the breath of the ocean, still. And sometimes, if the burial was kind, the shells remain intact, tiny spirals, delicate ridges, a lacework of ancient weather. Scientists, with careful tools and steady breath, shave these layers into slides. They place them under microscopes, and there in silence, they see the ghosts of the sky. Because the air once flowed through these creatures, their shells hardened in the chemistry of climate. Their rise and fall echoed the tilt of the earth, the pull of the moon, the heat of forgotten summers. Even chalk, that pale dust we associate with blackboards and quarries, is made from their bones, a mountain of skyborn creatures, a soft monument to light. And when tectonics lift these seabeds into mountains, when limestone cliffs stand exposed to wind and time. They tell a story not just of life, but of atmosphere. The ratio of carbon in their shells reveals ancient climates. The thickness of their layers tracks extinction and rebirth. Sometimes thin dark bands appear, the mark of a silence, a time when something interrupted the snow, volcanic ash, an asteroid's shadow, a sudden warmth that emptied the ocean's breath. These breaks in rhythm are the scars of the air, momentary absences recorded forever in stone, but most of the story is soft, repetitive, soothing in its persistence. It says life rose, life fell, and the sky always left something behind. Even now, new layers form. Modern plankton still rise with the sun and fall. When the light fades, their shells settle slowly, joining a story millions of years long. We walk across limestone floors. We build cathedrals from compressed air. We carve fossils into monuments, without always knowing what they held, because the sky leaves no bones, but the life it once passed through does. And yet, if the air itself can fossilize through the bodies of the small, what else might be written in the dust we have yet to understand? It was still early in Earth's long dreaming. The continents were scattered islands of silence. The sky, though brightening, still carried the weight of methane and carbon. But beneath the surface of the sea, light had already arrived. Not in flashes or fire, but in diffusion, a quiet wash of sun that fell through salt and water into the shallows of the ocean's skin. And there in the poetic zone, life learned how to hold it. Tiny organisms, cyanobacteria, algae, floating threads of green, began to weave sunlight into sugar. They opened themselves to photons, drinking the day and breathing out something new. Oxygen. They did not know what they were making. They did not do it for us. They simply bloomed. And in their blooming, they changed the air forever. But at first that oxygen had no place to go. There were no lungs to take it in, no forests to mirror it, no animals to crave its breath. Instead it drifted into seawater. It oxidized iron, turning oceans ruddy with rust. Red bands settled into stone, thin layers of iron-rich memory we still find today in ancient rocks. These are the banded iron formations, geologic fingerprints of photosynthesis long before the sky turned blue. The sea had become a light garden, invisible from above, but teeming with energy below. Every day the sun reached down through the waves, and every day those microscopic gardens rose to meet it. They turned light into matter. They bloomed and vanished. They multiplied beyond number. And when they died, they fell, like snow. Again, always, like snow, layer upon layer of light-born life, drifting to the seafloor, depositing carbon, leaving oxygen behind. They were silent workers. There was no sound in the water then. No fish, no whales, no coral songs, only the rustle of molecules and the slow breath of chemistry. And through this, the planet began to change. The oxygen accumulated. At first it poisoned what had come before. Anaerobic life, organisms that thrived in oxygen-free worlds, died in mass extinctions. It was called the Great Oxidation Event, though it happened over millions of years. But still, life continued. The sky lightened, ozone formed, radiation faded, and suddenly, light was not just safe, it was sacred. With the sky cleared, the sun belonged not just to the sea, but to the air, and yet the sea had held it first. Even now, more than half of the planet's oxygen still comes from the ocean, from phytoplankton, from algae, from the same floating gardens that learn to turn photons into breath. The photic zone remains, a thin band of water, no deeper than 200 meters, where light still weaves matter and invisible forests sway with the tide. We don't often think of the sea as bright. We picture the deep, the dark, the pressure. But there is a light that lives in it still, not from bulbs or fire, but from lineage. The sea remembers the sun not as something distant, but as something it once cradled. And so the rhythm continues. Light to sugar, sugar to life, life to memory, memory to stone. We see it in every reef, in every breath we take, in every moment where light meets body, because long before lungs knew what air was, the sea had already begun to teach the planet how to breathe. And yet, if the ocean once taught the earth to hold light, what other forms of brilliance might still be drifting unseen? Just below the surface, we drift downward now, past the photic shimmer, through the twilight zone, where blue deepens into ash, down into the midnight realm, where light no longer follows, and memory becomes weight. Down here the water thickens with pressure. Every inch holds the weight of all that floats above it. Every meter is denser, quieter, darker, and beneath it all, beneath the miles of silence and salt, beneath the continent's edge, there is a place where time pools. The trenches, the hollows, the deepest folds of the seafloor, the Mariana Trench, lies here like a breath held too long, not empty, but condensed, a basin of slow forgetting, where the planet folds inward and time becomes a mineral. In this depth, there are no waves, no tides that matter, no storms to stir the sediment. Even sound moves differently, flattened, hushed, as though the ocean itself has nothing left to say. And yet, things still fall. From above, a constant drift of matter, flakes of carbon, specks of dead plankton, dust from the bones of whales, marine snow they call it, a quiet, ceaseless fall of memory, soft as ash, steady as breath. It takes weeks, even months, for some of it to reach this far, and when it does, it settles gently into the abyssal plain, becoming part of the slow archive. Here, time is not marked by motion, but by accumulation, layer by layer, mineral by mineral. Life is compressed into sleep. The bones of fish, the cartilage of squid, the shells of the smallest drifting lives, all dissolve, all settle until the floor becomes a quilt of silence. In some places the sediment is a kilometre thick, and at its bottom lie fossils not just of animals but of moments, a volcanic eruption, traced by a sudden ash line, a bloom of plankton, revealed in a spike of calcium, a collapse of ice, preserved in grains of sand far from any shore. These are not memories made by mind, but by matter, and they are kept here, in darkness, in pressure, in stillness. Creatures live here too, pale, boneless, blind, shaped by patience. They do not rush, they do not flee, they drift slowly, as if dreaming alongside the planet. Some have not changed in millions of years, as if time forgot to touch them, or perhaps they remembered how not to move. And in this realm there are places where bones become stone, fossilized not in sediment, but in solitude. The drip of mineral-rich water into cavities left by rib cages, the slow replacement of marrow with crystal, the reimagining of life into geometry. No one watches it happen, no one hears it begin, but the trench remembers. It is a memory made without narration, a story with no protagonist, a pause that never ends. Scientists speak of deep time to describe these scales, the millions, the billions, the epochs that elude ordinary clocks. But down here, deep time is not a metaphor. It is the water, it is the mud, it is the pressure that slows even thought. To imagine this place is to stretch the mind beyond heartbeat, beyond history, because what happens here is not for us. It never was, and yet we are connected to it. Every plate that shifts, every mountain that rises, every earthquake that murmurs begins with what is held in these depths. The trench is not just a grave, it is a cradle of transition, a vault of beginnings. It tells us in silence, everything changes, but nothing is lost. And yet, if the deepest dark can remember the light that never reached it, what other shapes of time might still be folding quietly below our feet? It begins again, not with motion, but with rhythm, a subtle pull, a long breath drawn across the belly of the ocean. the tide returns, even here on the surface, in the shallows, across shifting sands. Time is not counted by seconds, but by movement, in and out, push and pull. The moon's soft gravity drawing water like a whisper, pulling threads, each wave a sigh, each current a sentence in a language older than air. And yet, even this rhythm forgets. Energy once pure is borrowed. The earth spins, but slower each day, friction unseen. Constant steals a fraction of motion with every wave that rolls ashore. A silent tax paid to entropy, to heat, to where the tides too erode. Not just cliffs and coastlines, but the pattern itself. Long ago, the moon was closer, tides wilder, days shorter. The sea's breath came faster, its pull more fierce, but as the moon drifts away, 4 centimeters per year, quietly like a lover growing distant, the tides become gentler. The earth slows its turning. Entropy is not chaos, it is softening, dissolution. A slow exhale of structure into warmth. The tide returns, but never exactly the same. There is always loss, always forgetting. And yet, the sea continues to move, like memory, like music. It needs no perfection to persist. Each wave carries forward, not the energy of its origin, but the echo, the pattern, the attempt. Even broken rhythms still form tides. It is this persistence, despite erosion, despite entropy, that becomes its own kind of remembering. On the shore we see it in lines of driftwood, in shells sorted by size, in kelp curled like script upon wet sand. Further out, tides rearrange entire coastlines, carve estuaries, reshape deltas. Salt marshes breathe with their pulse. Mangroves grow to their beat. Life synchronizes with their forgetting. Even coral reefs, fixed and ancient, build their bodies in tune with the waxing pull. Polyps open and close in time, with the moon's invisible hand. And beneath it all, the earth's crust flexes. Tidal forces do not stop at water's edge. They move through rock, through mantle, through molten core. The whole planet sways just slightly, as if rocked to sleep by lunar lullaby, but always, always the movement cost. Turbulence becomes warmth. Motion becomes noise. Clarity becomes blur. Energy flows one way, outward, downward, toward dissolution. This is entropy, the deep truth that all systems drift towards stillness, not as punishment, but as release. And yet, there is beauty in the tide's insistence. Its return is not defiance, but grace. The sea does not resist forgetting. It folds it in. Each lost wave makes room for the next. Each silence deepens the rhythm. And so the planet remembers by letting go, by letting energy slip into heat, into hush, into the soft hands of time. We feel it, too, in our tides. Our breathing, our fading. Not everything is meant to be held. Some things are meant to pass through, and yet, if even forgetting has a rhythm, what melodies of loss might still be echoing in the turning of the sea? It was not long before the ocean began to record us. Not in myth, not in language, but in matter, in the silent, sedimentary way it has always recorded things. First came our ships, wooden ribs, iron hulls, wrecked and buried. Then came our waste, barrels, nets, bottles, strings of plastic adrift like synthetic kelp. Now the sea holds new layers, unlike any it has cradled before. In trenches once home to trilobites, in reefs once built by coral and time, lie fragments of our era, wires twisted into sediment, glass pressed flat by pressure, plastic shapes, still perfect, untouched by rot or breath, techno-fossils, not born of bone or shell, but of industry, of manufacture, of thought made object. They are settling quietly in canyons, in deltas, in ocean gyres, not because they belong, but because gravity pulls everything home, and so we are entering the strata. Just as ammonites marked the Mesozoic, just as fern imprints mark the Carboniferous. We are now leaving behind a polymer signature. Future geologists, if there are any, will not need to guess where our age began. They will see it in the layers, a sudden rise in aluminum, a spike in nitrogen, traces of plutonium, the appearance of microplastics woven into every corner of sediment. This is the Anthropocene, our geologic fingerprint, our brief voice in the rock. And like all things in deep time, it is neither praise nor punishment, it is record. Because the earth does not moralize, it remembers. It stores our stories as it does everything else, in decay, in burial, in rearrangement. The plastic bottle lost at sea today might someday sit beside a fossilized clam, sealed in silt, pressed into a future we will never meet. And somewhere in the abyss, there are entire landfills slowly turning to stone. Entropy, even here, does its work. Currents fray our creations, microbes chew what they can, but much of it remains, too durable, too slow to break, too new to know how to disappear, and still there is silence. No one watches this transformation, no ceremony, just a tide of material layering itself into the future. There are reefs now, growing not from coral, but from discarded scaffolds, rusted cars, concrete ruins. Fish swim among them. Algae bloom across their surfaces. Life, indifferent, adapts, and in this there is an unsettling beauty, because the earth, even in its grief, recycles, not in the way we intend, but in the way it always has. It compresses, it buries, it transforms, and so our age will fossilize, not just in bones or words, but in the traces we leave behind. The isotopic shift of carbon in the ice, the radioactive drift in the sediment, the colors of synthetic pigment in petrified plastic. We are writing a story in things that do not rot, and it is a story that will outlast us, not because it is noble, but because it is dense, durable, entrenched. The deep sea does not forget easily. It hoards our inventions alongside trilobites and glass sponges. It tucks away our intentions like errant seeds. Perhaps someday a mountain will rise from a subducted coastline, and inside its strata a fragment of circuit board will lie beside a fossil scallop. Two lives, two memories, pressed into the same silence. And yet, if even our discarded machines can be woven into the Earth's deep archive, what stories of ours might already be dreaming their way into stone? Far from the trenches beyond the pull of tides, there are places where silence takes another form, cold, still, layered. In the polar reaches of the world, on the frozen domes of Antarctica, across the blue shadows of Greenland, snow never truly melts. It falls and stays, falls again and thickens, falls once more and forgets the shape of falling, until snow becomes ice, and ice becomes memory. Here the atmosphere leaves behind its ghost, not in fossils, but in bubbles, tiny spheres of ancient air, trapped as snow compresses over centuries, each one a breath, frozen, still holding the carbon, the methane, the vapor of skies we will never see again. And when we drill deep, when we pull up cylinders of that quiet blue ice, we are not mining water, we are reading weather, each layer, a winter, each shifting color, a warming, each trapped bubble, a whisper from an old sky. Some of the oldest ice is over 800,000 years old. It holds the exhale of mammoths, the winds of Neanderthals, ash from eruptions long vanished beneath forests, and still it holds on. Ice does not remember in words. It remembers in ratios. The balance of isotopes tells us the warmth of ancient summers. The thickness of layers tells us how much snow fell. The chemical traces tell us of distant fires, of spreading deserts, of air that changed and changed again. In this way, clouds never truly vanish. They leave behind vapor trails locked in crystals. Storms become archives. Droughts become shadows pressed into frost. And in the deepest cores we see the pulse of the planet. Warm, cold, warm again, Oxygen levels rise and fall, carbon traces swell, then fade. Cycles, always cycles. Breath drawn in, breath let go, and then, more recently, a spike, a sudden sharp rise in carbon, in nitrogen, in lead, the mark of industry, of engine, of us. Our breath too is now caught in the layers. The smoke of our cities, the exhale of our machines, the trace metals of war, and just as trilobites once marked a boundary in stone, we have marked one in ice. It is not just a climate record, it is planetary testimony, because these layers cannot lie. They preserve what we no longer see, they keep the sky from vanishing completely, and in their silence they remind us how short our memory really is. Most of our written history covers mere thousands of years. The ice remembers hundreds of thousands. It watched us before we knew how to plant seeds. It knew the wind before it ever passed through windows, and it is melting faster each year. The archive dripping away into the sea, not erased but dissolved. There are stories still locked in ice that we may never read, ancient skies we will never inhale, extinct storms that once danced across unbroken plains. What the ocean holds in pressure, the ice holds in patience, and for now, just for now, we can still listen, to drill, to melt carefully, to measure each bubble like a breath held too long. The clouds are not gone, they are sleeping in crystal, waiting in the cold, telling us quietly that every breath ever taken still lingers somewhere. And yet, if the sky itself can be preserved in frozen silence, what other forgotten weathers might be waiting to be remembered? There are maps that no longer match the world. Lines that once bordered nations now lie beneath tides. Names lost to the sea. Coastlines redrawn, not by war, but by water. Because the earth drifts. Not just its continents, but its memories. Slowly, subtly, entire land masses shift. They slide on molten mantle. A quiet, ceaseless journey of crust over fire. At the surface, it feels still. We walk our shorelines as if they've always been there. But beneath us, everything moves. The continents are not fixed. They float, slow tectonic ships drifting through geologic time. Gondwana, Laurasia, Pangaea, long before them. Worlds stitched together, then torn apart by subduction, uplift, divergence. And with each shift, shorelines vanish. Some are pulled under, others rise, drying into cliffs that once knew only tide. But it is not just land that drifts. It is memory, ancient ports, long-drowned temples, cities swallowed by waves and forgotten by language. They still lie beneath us. Dwarka, Pavlopetri, Heracleion, ruins tangled in silt, stone columns softened by coral, archways now passed through by fish, and further still beyond myth, beyond record, our older shores, coastlines from ice ages, when the sea sat lower, and humans walked between lands now separated by water. The Bering Land Bridge, Doggerland beneath the North Sea, Sunderland between Southeast Asia's islands, all gone now, submerged, yet not entirely erased, because the sea remembers. Barnacles grow on fallen temples, algae thread through ancient streets, waves speak the shape of once walled harbours. Even in forgetting, the planet leaves clues. Sonar scans trace underwater ridges. Satellite imagery reveals old riverbeds now drowned. Stone paths are found beneath sediment, stretching toward nothing. And then there are the names, lost not to tides, but to silence. Languages drowned with their speakers, spoken once on shores that no longer rise above the surface. The syllables now exist only in rock art, in patterns of trade shells, in the shape of tools left behind. Memory, like a continent, can fracture and drift. We try to pin it down, to label ruins, to assign dates, but the truth is, older than evidence, older than ink, older than the very languages we use to remember. Still, the earth keeps a different kind of archive, a slow one, a layered one. Ruins beneath sand, tombs beneath salt, walls leaning into tectonic slopes carried far from the civilizations that built them. There is stonework in the Andes that sits far from any ancient city, shifted by uplift, split by seismic breath. There are statues on Pacific seamounts that no longer rise above the waves, and yet life continues to cling. Barnacles grip old marble, anemones bloom in palace courtyards now collapsed. Fishes dart through colonnades, as if memory too needs hosts, as if forgetting is never quite complete, because the sea may take names but it leaves form, and form can be found, traced, felt. The continents drift but they do not vanish. Even submerged they push against the water, changing currents, guiding migrations, telling stories in the way waves wrap around them. And so too do we drift. We forget, we move, we build again, but the pattern remains. Land rising and falling, history settling and lifting like breath. Perhaps what we call lost is only what we can no longer place, but the earth remembers in barnacles, in ruin, in tilt, and yet. If even forgotten shores can leave fingerprints in the sea, what other foundations might lie just beneath the waves, waiting to be known again? The ocean is not just water, it is memory, dissolved, a memory written in ions, in sodium and chloride, in magnesium, calcium, potassium, a taste older than language, older than blood, because salt, like grief, accumulates slowly, silently, irreversibly. It begins with stone, with mountains weathered by wind and rain, with rivers carving valleys, carrying away whispers of granite and basalt, a molecule here, a grain there, rock softened by water's persistent hand. These rivers do not cry, they erode, but in that erosion they weep the planet's minerals into the sea, and the sea keeps them. Evaporation removes water, but not salt. Tides pull and churn, but do not cleanse, so the salinity grows, a slow rising note in the ocean's long song. Every wave, every splash, every foam-tipped surge carries with it the tears of stone. The earth weeps, and the ocean does not forget. We measure the salinity now, roughly 35 parts per thousand, but this is only an average, a simplification of something ancient and dynamic, because salinity tells us where rivers have been, where deserts dried, where glaciers once carved, where volcanoes bled minerals into streams, in places near freshwater mouths. The ocean softens, in arid basins under heavy sun, it thickens, and beneath it all, in the deep, where few have gone, salinity shapes currents, it creates density, it drives the thermohaline circulation, a global conveyor of heat and breath. It moves warmth from equator to pole, chilling deep water, returning it saltier, denser, colder. This too is a memory, a loop of motion born from salinity and temperature, from evaporation and freeze, a memory that takes 1,000 years to cycle, unfolding across generations of sky. Even sea ice plays a role. When the polar ocean freezes, the salt is rejected, sinking downward, creating heavier currents that flow into the abyss and stir the deep. Without salt, the ocean would still move, but not like this, not with such rhythm, not with such sorrowed grace, and perhaps that is why the sea is so often compared to tears, not just for its salt, but for its quiet retention of everything that has passed through it. It holds the erosion of mountains, the runoff from fields, the minerals of fallen rain, the whispers of storms. Even our bodies reflect it. Our blood, a diluted echo of ancient seawater, our tears, a mirror of rivers that once drained into primal oceans. To taste the ocean is to taste the earth's weeping, not a sorrow to be fixed, but a transformation to be honored. The sea does not cry in pain. It remembers in chemistry, and when we study it, when we measure its salt and trace its isotopes, we read a story told in dissolution. We learn when rain first softened continents, when iron ran free, when limestone dissolved. when life began to alter the balance. Even now, salinity is shifting, ice melts, fresh water flows, currents slow, the memory is changing. But that too is part of the pattern, because nothing in the ocean is still, not even the salt. It drifts, it settles, it stirs, and in that movement, a history remains. A wave is not just water pushed by wind, it is salt carried forward, stone become motion, grief become tide, and yet, if even the salt remembers the dissolving of the earth, what else might be carried in the chemistry of the sea, waiting to be heard? Beneath that salted stillness, beneath the silence and weight of time, the ocean did something the sky had not yet done. It began to glow in the deep, where sunlight fades to shadow, where pressure thickens and warmth disappears. Life learned how to carry light within itself, not borrowed from stars, not captured from sun rays, but born quietly chemically from the body, bioluminescence, cold fire, blue breath, a glimmer in the blackness. It began perhaps as a signal, a call, a warning, a lure, but deeper than that, it was a language in a place where no voice could travel. Jellies pulsed with halos, shrimp sparkled in trails, anglerfish lit lanterns on their foreheads, waiting in the still. Some creatures painted the water as they moved, leaving behind constellations of plankton glow. Others released bursts of light when touched, a final flare to confuse, to blind, to vanish. This wasn't just survival, it was memory made visible, a way to mark presence in an unlit world. And as the atmosphere above remained thick, opaque with volcanic breath and greenhouse haze, the stars overhead were still hidden, their light muffled by methane skies, their stories untold. So for a time it was the sea that held the only fire, the only shimmer, the only night sky. Except here, the stars moved, they swam, they fed, they danced in spirals, in blooms, in slow electric drift. The ocean then became a kind of galaxy, not of gas and dust, but of cells, each one a beacon, each flicker a heartbeat in the dark. And we still see them today, in warm coastal waters. When the tide is right, they bloom again, billions of dinoflagellates glowing with every step, every oar stroke, every breath. The sand lights up, the surf sparkles, the sea becomes sky, briefly inverted. It is not illusion, it is inheritance, a memory reawakened. Because long before we looked up and mapped the stars, the earth was already teaching itself how to shine. The chemistry is elegant. Luciferin meets oxygen, a gentle reaction, no heat, no flame, just light, sustainable, silent, sacred. In the dark of the deep sea, this glow persists, unafraid of depth, unafraid of time, even in trenches where no sunlight has ever entered, where pressure crushes and sound is swallowed. A single flicker still occurs. We send down cameras, and they return with glimpses, spirals of light, blinking eyes, threads of glowing fins, moving like auroras through black. It is not spectacle, it is survival, but it is also poetry, because this is not the light of dominance, it is the light of presence, a way to say, I am here when all else is darkness. Perhaps the stars themselves began like this, gravitational fires in an empty sky, small beacons pulsing into vastness. And maybe the ocean was practicing, rehearsing starlight before the atmosphere cleared, before eyes evolved to look upward. Maybe light did not begin in heaven, but in depth. And even now, the two remain reflections. The sea at night mirrors the sky, glints above, glints below, both silent, both drifting. And within us, within ourselves, we still carry fragments of that thin chemistry, our own bioluminescent ancestors coded into our genes, reminding us quietly that we too once glowed, that the light we seek in galaxies once pulsed in plankton, that the first fire wasn't flame, but phosphorescent. And yet, if life could learn to make light before the sky ever showed its stars, What other forms of brilliance might be waiting in the dark, still undiscovered, above the glowing depths, in the upper blue veils of the sea? Another miracle was unfolding, one we still cannot fully see, though it shapes the breath of the world. There, just below the surface, bathed in morning light and drifting with the tide, grow the sea's invisible forests, not rooted, not branching, not rising into canopies, but alive, countless, suspended, phytoplankton, tiny glassy cells, some no bigger than dust that bloom in numbers beyond imagining. They do not wave in winds, but in currents. They do not rustle, but shimmer, and still they breathe. For all of us, these microscopic organisms, soft with chlorophyll and light, perform photosynthesis as forests do, turning sunlight into sugar, releasing oxygen as a byproduct of their quiet labor. In fact, they do more than trees, more than grasses, more than all land plants combined. Nearly half of the oxygen in our atmosphere comes from the ocean, from plankton, from this floating bloom of green language spoken silently across the sea. Every other breath we take, every inhale while sleeping, every exhale while dreaming, is a gift from them. And yet, we rarely see them. Only when they gather, in great swirling blooms seen from satellites, do we glimpse their mass, turquoise patches in open water, streaks of color in swirling gyres, a painter's brush of life from space. But even then, we don't feel them. We only feel their absence when they begin to falter. These invisible forests are sensitive to temperature, to acidity, to light, to change. Warming seas slow their bloom. Stratified waters keep nutrients from rising. Carbon shifts their balance. And yet they persist, evolving over eons, rising and falling with seasons, with currents, with memory. Some drift for weeks, some live only hours. Some are eaten by zooplankton, some fall to the seafloor, carrying carbon down like rain. In this way, they are not just lungs, they are part of the planet's carbon cycle, capturing, locking away, rebalancing what is breathed and burned. And when they die, they become part of that slow sedimentary script written at the bottom of the sea. A story in calcium, in silica, in carbonates layered so finely we need microscopes to read their handwriting. In their silence, they are keepers of scale, of deep time, of planetary breath. The sea does not need trees. It has this, a floating forest of light harvesters, suspended just where the sun can reach, drifting softly across the globe. And in some distant way, the phytoplankton remember what the early sky once knew. When oxygen first began to rise, when the great oxidation event painted the planet in rust, when sunlight became food and breath became abundance, they are descendants of that age, carriers of that first green knowledge. Ancestral forests, not of wood, but of water and light. Even today, when we dip a flask into the sea and look with magnification, we see their forms, delicate chains, geometric lattices, cells with tiny scales like ancient coins, each one a tree drifting, and though we cannot hear them, they are speaking, not in sound, but in action, in the oxygen they offer, in the carbon they bury, in the balance they preserve. The forest breathes, not just above, but below, and not with rustling leaves, but with the shimmer of sunlight, meeting the silence of cells. And yet, if even the smallest life can carry the planet's breath, what larger truths might be hidden in the drifting green silence, just beneath the waves, as light filters through shallow tropical waters, where warmth lingers and currents slow. A different kind of forest emerges, one not made of leaves or plankton, but of skeletons, coral reefs. They rise in hushed procession, slowly, impossibly, from the bones of their own making. Calcium carbonate, built over lifetimes, layer upon layer, generation upon generation, until what began as a single polyp becomes a living monument, a limestone cathedral. not built by hands, not carved by tool or plan, but by instinct, by repetition, by death transformed into shelter. Each coral polyp lives for only a short time, tiny, soft, delicate. It secretes a stony base beneath itself, then passes, leaving a foundation for the next, and the next. Thousands of years pass, tides shift, seas rise and fall, and the reef continues growing upward, outward, always reaching toward light. These reefs are not still. They bloom with color, with movement, with life. Fish flicker between coral towers. Anemones sway in rhythm with current. Clams glow with blue lips. Octopuses vanish into texture, a million forms each nested within the bones of a million more. And yet beneath the color, beneath the movement, the reef is made of time, solidified breath, compressed memory, a record not of a single moment, but of continuity. Every inch of reef is a negotiation between building and erosion, growth and dissolution, life and the sea that always seeks to take it back. Storms break pieces away, predators nibble, acidity rises, but the reef persists, not by strength, but by abundance. It survives by remembering how to rebuild a wall. In this, it resembles a city, with corridors, with spires, with markets of fish and alleyways of eel. It has borders, territories, echoes of pulse and color, a rhythm kept not by bells but by tides and moonlight. It is a living archive. Scientists drill into old reefs and find rings, like those in trees, marking warm years, cold years, bleaching events, spikes in sediment. They trace coral chemistry to read the temperature of ancient waters, the salinity of vanished seas, even the carbon dioxide of forgotten skies. Each reef is a diary, each limestone spine, a page written in salt and time, and yet they are fragile, so much older than us, and still vulnerable. A few degrees of warming, a surge of runoff, a shift in pH, that's all it takes for color to vanish, for coral to bleach and then to crumble. The cathedrals fall not in sound but in quiet retreat, white ghosts where once was brilliance. But even in their fading reefs offer a kind of grace. Broken coral becomes sand, sand becomes island, island becomes home. The process does not end. It merely changes form. In this way, reefs are not just monuments to life, but to life's transformation, to the way memory becomes landscape, to how breath becomes bone, becomes shelter, becomes history. When we swim above a reef, we float across centuries, we glide over the labor of countless lives, each no bigger than a grain of rice, each leaving something behind, and below us arched walls, curved towers, spires of stone rising through the blue. It is easy to call them cathedrals, but they are more than metaphor. They are evidence that death can build, that beauty can be assembled one breath at a time, that memory in the ocean takes on form and color and sound. And yet, if the sea can turn loss into structure, what other quiet architectures of time might we be drifting above, unaware? Sometimes the earth forgets deliberately, not through silence, but through movement. Not everything buried is broken. Some things are simply rearranged. Look at a map of the world, and already the shapes hint at a puzzle once complete. Coastlines echo each other. Ridges mirror valleys. Stone remembers across oceans. But long before our names, before our borders, before even the familiar outlines of continents, there were others, supercontinents. Pangaea, Gondwana, Rodinia, massive configurations of land, gathered and scattered over hundreds of millions of years. They rose slowly, slabs of crust drawn inward by tectonic longing, and they broke apart just as slowly, cracked open by heat from below, by rifts that widened like breath. This is the deep choreography of the earth. The supercontinents are gone now, dissolved into the continents we know, but their ghosts remain, etched into the seafloor, carved into mineral veins, written in the alignment of mountain ranges that now lie oceans apart. You can trace them if you know where to look. In Brazil and West Africa, rocks match perfectly across the Atlantic as if once part of the same skin. The Appalachian Mountains in North America find their twin in Scotland's Highlands, a single ridge now separated by an ocean's lifetime. Fossils of identical ferns, found on every southern continent, whisper of Gondwana, a vast southern landmass, where now only fragments remain. Antarctica, Australia, South America, Africa, India. These weren't just connected by land, they were connected by climate, by ecosystems, by the slow exchange of wind and life. When they split, the world changed. New coastlines formed, new currents began. The Atlantic Ocean opened like a wound that would never quite close, and beneath it all, the scars remain. Mid-ocean ridges, where magma still spills to create new seafloor, mark the places of rupture. They are the planetary fault lines, pulsing gently with creation. We sail over them now, often unaware, above a seam that unzips the world in slow motion, and still the continents drift. At the speed of fingernails, they journey across the mantle, carrying their climates, their ecosystems, their memories. The Indian subcontinent, once adrift, collided with Asia, thrusting up the Himalayas, the highest mountains in the world, born not from rising but from crashing. Each supercontinent was a phase, a breath drawn in, a breath let go. The earth expands and contracts in these long geologic exhalations, and each time the land gathers, new species form. Each time it separates, oceans bloom, ecosystems collide, extinctions ripple outward. Memory isn't just layered, it's mobile. It moves with the crust, it evolves with the drift, and so the ghosts remain, not just in rock, but in DNA, in climate, in the map of all things. We carry Pangaea in our bones, in the way our ancestors migrated, following land bridges that no longer exist, in the seeds that blew across connected valleys, in the fossils found at the tops of mountains that once lay beneath ancient seas. Supercontinents have broken and reformed at least 7 times in Earth's history, and they will again. Already the plates move, already a new future continent, sometimes called Amasia, is imagined in maps yet to exist. The drift never stops. It is how the planet breathes. What we know now as home was once seafloor, was once desert, was once the heart of something whole, and one day it may become ocean again, because permanence is an illusion carved by temporary stillness. But the earth remembers in movement. It folds and unfolds, not to forget, but to reshape. And yet, if continents themselves can carry the ghosts of ancient wholeness, what memories might lie buried between their drifting edges, still waiting to reunite? In the deepest folds of the ocean, far below even light's last reach, the world is pressed into shape, not by hands, not by wind, but by pressure, quiet, unrelenting, complete. Here beneath the trenches and tectonic arcs, the weight of the entire ocean presses down. Every square inch of life is met with 1,000 kilograms of force, every motion measured, every shape decided by what can endure. And yet, the deep does not crush. It preserves, not in amber, not in ice, but in stillness and density. Bones dissolve where they are weak. What remains is what endures. Mineral shells, glass bones, skins like translucent paper. Some fish are barely more than breath wrapped in tissue. Their skulls see-through, their muscles so soft they cannot resist the currents. Only drift, only shape themselves into the space they occupy. Others build armor instead. Crustaceans with plates like mosaics, snails with iron scales, forged near hydrothermal vents. Life here wears pressure like a memory, not just endured but embodied. Each creature sculpted not for speed, not for beauty, but for survival within constraint. Every angle, every curve, whittled by silence, And it is not just life that remembers. Minerals too take new form. At these depths, carbon turns to diamond, crystals arrange themselves more tightly, atoms drawn inward by force, until the structure changes. Even fossils become denser here, shells slowly replaced by heavier minerals, petrified in geometries only pressure can design. It is strange to think that the further we go from sunlight, the clearer the outlines become, as if the absence of light sharpens the memory of form. Scientists send submersibles to explore these depths. They return with images of creatures like dreams, made solid, jellyfish, with glowing ribs, sea cucumbers hovering like ghosts, octopuses with dumpling eyes and arms like ribbons. And in these forms we see time slowed, not paused but softened, gentled by the weight that shapes them. These species live longer, they grow slower, they forget faster, but they remain because pressure, when it comes without interruption, creates permanence. That's why we find the oldest sediment undisturbed in trenches miles below. That's why we find the most complete fossils buried not in sand but in silt compacted over eons. What we thought was lost is only deeply pressed, tucked into layers of mineral sleep, waiting. And perhaps that is what memory is, not a flame to keep lit, but a shape we learn to hold, a form we adapt to, a pattern etched so deeply it becomes structure. The earth teaches this, that pressure is not always destruction. Sometimes it is refinement. Sometimes it is preservation. What endures is not what resists, but what yields with purpose. The trench does not scream, it compresses, and in doing so it holds the finest details. And yet, if pressure can carve shape into both body and stone, what forgotten forms might still lie hidden, preserved not in light, but in the gravity of silence? Even in the deepest dark, the earth breathes. It does not rise with chest or rib. It does not exhale with wind or leaf. It pulses from the seafloor, from cracks in basalt, from chimneys of mineral, from vents that exhale warmth, like the heart of something dreaming. Hydrothermal vents, places where seawater seeps into the crust, is heated by magma, and returns transformed, laden with iron, sulfur, manganese, and the heat of the planet's quiet fire. These vents do not roar. They wisp plumes of black smoke drift upward. Not smoke at all, but particles of metal and mineral, suspended in water hotter than boiling, yet held together by pressure. They rise like breath, measured, rhythmic, alive, and around them life. Not life as we know it above, not green, not leafy, not dependent on sunlight, but chemosynthetic life. Life that feeds on chemical reaction instead of rays, tube worms stretching meters long, blood-red plumes filtering sulfide, clams with no mouths, no stomachs, just symbiotic bacteria turning vent fluid into sustenance. Ghostly crabs, blind but busy, shrimp clustered in warmth. This is the oldest warmth, not from the sun, but from within. Some scientists believe that life itself began here, not in shallow tide pools or lightning-struck ponds, but in these deep crucibles where minerals, heat and water met in perfect conversation. The vents offered protection, nutrients, energy, a place where molecules could test themselves, fold, bond, replicate, drift in their flickering warmth. The first cells may have stirred long before the sky ever turned blue, long before the atmosphere invited breath. And even now they remain, not fossils, not echoes, but living memories. Hydrothermal vent communities are among the most ancient ecosystems on Earth, survivors of mass extinctions, of planetary shifts, of silence. They do not rely on surface cycles. They do not wait for seasons. They follow the pulse of the Earth itself, because these vents open and close. They move, they expire. Some last decades, others millennia, but eventually the heat fades. the minerals wane, and life moves on to another crack, another breath, another warm cathedral rising from the abyss. And over time, the old vents become chimneys of stone, collapsed, quiet, marked only by rings of sulphur, by the shells left behind, by the absence of movement where once the seafloor glowed. But they are not forgotten. We find them. We send cameras, robots, sensors. We measure the chemical gradients, map the flows, sequence the DNA of creatures whose ancestors may have never seen sunlight. In these discoveries we glimpse something older than myth, that life did not begin with sky, but with stone, that warmth is not always above, that creation can bloom in dark places. Hydrothermal vents are not rare. They line the mid-ocean ridges, the tectonic seams of the world, places where Earth is still creating new crust, still shaping itself from within, and wherever the crust breaks, the pulse escapes, not wildly, but steadily, with rhythm. It is easy to think of the Earth as solid, but it is not. It moves, it breathes, it pulses, and from these pulses, life continues, fed not by sunlight, but by the quiet chemistry of persistence. Even now, somewhere in the dark, a vent opens, heat returns, bacteria bloom, a tube grows, a shell forms, and the seafloor pulses again. And yet, if life began not with light but with heat, what other origins might still be pulsing quietly beneath us, waiting to rise? Every journey moves toward forgetting. Even rivers, they begin as whispers, rain gathering in the folds of stone, glacial melt dripping from mountaintop silence. They become threads, then veins, then bodies wide enough to carry whole forests. They cut through continents. They carve valleys, nourish plains, pull minerals from bone and carry history with them. And always, they flow toward the sea. But when they arrive, they do not collide. They do not rage or halt. They dissolve. The salt meets the sweet and the river forgets itself. At the delta, land crumbles into water, a slow surrender of shape. Here, sediment is offered like ash to tide, clay, silt and sand. The powdered remains of mountain tree bone settle into layered stillness. But even in this death, the river speaks. It speaks through the color of the water, through the widening braid of its mouth, through the way the ocean changes at the touch of fresh delta silts. Do not forget easily. They carry pollen from forests long extinct, charcoal from fires long cooled, traces of tools, bones, civilizations swallowed by their own soil, the Nile, the Ganges, the Mekong. These are not just rivers, they are memory in motion. And when they meet the ocean, their stories do not end. They transform. Buried in estuary mud are the seeds of empires. Flood layers mark the rhythm of ancient seasons. Cores drawn from delta beds tell us when ice last melted, when droughts dried whole continents, when salt took back the land. But deltas too are vanishing. The rivers are dammed, their pulses interrupted. The sediments that once built land outward now settle behind concrete, and the sea, rising, warming, relentless, pushes inward, submerging coastlines, salting fields, drowning the edges where river once taught land how to end. Still something remains in the brackish blend, a mingling, a negotiation, a kind of rebirth. Brine carries the breath of river into current. Nutrients mix, life blooms, estuaries teem with fish, with grass, with the flicker of eels, and the rise of birds. Even as the river dies, its body feeds something larger, because the ocean too remembers the rivers, not by name, but by pattern. Where a river once flowed, currents shift, salt gradients spiral, plankton bloom in old channels, fisheries thrive in the memory of fresh water, and beneath it all, the fossil riverbeds remain, cut into the seafloor like scars, now buried, now drowned, but still traceable, still present, in the Gulf of Mexico, in the North Sea, in every drowned delta on Earth. There are stories buried in silt, too deep for the current to stir. They are not gone, only sleeping. Even the Amazon, that great green serpent of the continent, once flowed in the opposite direction toward the Pacific, before the Andes rose to reverse it. Rivers can change their minds, so can the sea. The truth is, no river ends. It only dissolves into something greater. It becomes tide, it becomes salt, it becomes the long memory of the ocean. And in this, perhaps the river is not dying at all. Perhaps it is returning, becoming part of the pulse, the breath, the thought of the sea. And yet, if every river must one day surrender its name, what echoes of ourselves might also be carried forward, long after the current forgets where we began? Light too has a journey, not just across sky, but into water, and in that descent it is changed. When sunlight touches the ocean's surface, it enters not with violence but with softness, a golden hush brushing waves, a slow breath sliding into salt. But the sea does not welcome all light equally. Red is the first to vanish. Absorbed in the upper meters, it fades into warmth, its wavelength too long to linger. Then orange, then yellow. Each hue falls away as if the ocean is forgetting the colors of the sun. One by one, only blue remains, not forever, but longer. It travels deepest, piercing down through the photic zone, touching plankton, caressing reefs, painting everything in cool shadow. This is why the sea looks blue, not because it is blue, but because it remembers blue longest. The ocean is a filter of time, a lens of memory, a vast shifting archive that stores not just life and sediment, but light. And as we descend, we pass through absence. The colors we know vanish. The world becomes monochrome, then dark, until only bioluminescence glows, and even that flickers into black. But this fading is not death. It is transition, because even in the deepest waters, light has left its mark. Corals adjust their pigments. Fish evolve eyes tuned to blue-green shimmer. Squid use red, knowing predators cannot see it below. Some creatures remain transparent, holding no color at all, as if surrendering the burden of light altogether. And when we return to the surface, we rise back through memory, from darkness to blue to gold, each layer a boundary, each depth a quiet forgetting. There are ancient traditions that speak of water as a veil, a liminal space between worlds, a place where the soul drifts, where the past is filtered and the future waits. Perhaps they were not wrong. Even the light must pass through thresholds, even photons dissolve. And in this gentle erasure, the ocean reveals itself as a kind of mirror, not of surface but of memory, because what we see from above, those endless shades of teal and sapphire, are not color alone, they are records. They tell of algae blooms, of dissolved particles, of suspended sand. They change with seasons, with rain, with human touch. The pale blue filter is not constant. It drifts, it breathes, it reflects what lies within. Satellites scan the ocean for these subtle changes in color, tracking plankton, mapping runoff, reading the chemistry of the sea from shifting hues. Color becomes data, light becomes knowledge, and still below it all, the ancient fading continues. We sink, and color is peeled away, not stolen, but gently set down, like a robe shed for silence, like memory slipping into sleep. Even the water itself is not colorless. It is blue because it chooses what to hold. And so light too is shaped by the sea, transformed, filtered, remembered, just as sound changes in depth, just as pressure sculpts bodies. Light is carved by water into absence and then into longing, because what we do not see we begin to imagine, and what we imagine becomes memory. So when we gaze into the ocean's blue from shore, from ship, from sky, we are not seeing the water, we are seeing what has survived. We are seeing what light, still remembers, after all else has been surrendered. And yet, if the sea chooses which colours to carry, what other forgotten hues of time might still be flickering below, just beyond the reach of sight? There are moments when the line between sea and sky disappears, when the horizon vanishes into silver breath, and we can no longer say where the ocean ends and the clouds begin. In these moments, the earth holds a mirror to itself, not glass, not polished stone, but water. The ocean becomes a hollow mirror, reflective, elusive, dreaming. It mimics the sky, not just in surface shimmer, but in rhythm, in depth, in endlessness. It does not merely hold the clouds, it becomes their twin. The same currents that move the atmosphere also move the sea. Jet streams above, gyres below, cyclones in air, whirlpools in brine. The physics is familiar, fluid dynamics whispering in two voices. Even the clouds are born from the sea. Evaporation lifts water into sky, condensation gathers it into form, and then it falls again. Rain is not new, it is returned, the sky pouring back what the ocean once gave, and in that cycle from wave to vapor to cloud to drop, we find repetition, we find memory. The clouds are archives of water, but also of warmth and dust and breath. They hold what the sea has seen. They drift it across continents, and when they vanish into rain, they begin the process again, feeding rivers, etching stone, pulling minerals back into the waiting arms of the ocean. It is a closed loop, but within it, infinite variation. The mirror is not perfect. It ripples, it distorts, it dreams. At dawn, the sea holds a sky still pink with sleep. At noon, it swallows the sun whole. At night, it echoes constellations, dancing in silver threads on its surface. Even in storm, when the sky turns violent and grey, the ocean responds, matching tone, matching fury, and beneath it all, quiet, because the mirror is only surface. Below, the sea is older than sky. It remembers more. It forgets less. When we look into it, we see reflection, but the ocean is also looking back. It has seen more sunrises than we can count. It has mirrored skies we no longer remember, skies thick with methane, skies without stars, skies before breath, and still it mirrors, still it responds. Some say the ocean is a subconscious, a dreaming brain whose ripples are thoughts too large for language. And what it reflects is not just the sky, but the self. To stand at a shore, to look into the water, is to meet a version of the world turned inside out. Light meets liquid, clouds meet depth, the above meets the below, and in that joining, we see balance. Air feeds sea, sea feeds air, each one a sibling in the long breath of the planet. Even our myths have always known this, that the sea is more than water. It is feeling, it is echo, it is sky turned inward. And yet, if the ocean can hold the sky without breaking it, what other reflections might still be waiting in the deep? Mirrors not of light, but of time itself. Beneath that mirror, beneath the moving tides and drifting salt, the seafloor writes, not in ink, not in sound, but in sediment, fine grains dropped in silence. Layer upon patient layer, mud becomes memory. Each particle is a letter, each stratum a sentence, each core of seafloor pulled from the deep is a scroll of Earth's ancient breath. And the ocean, for all its motion, is a faithful archivist. It keeps what falls, dust from deserts carried by wind for thousands of miles, pollen from vanished forests, washed through rivers and into the sea, ash from volcanoes, falling in soft grey snow. Even the bones of plankton, too small to see, become part of this long story, calcium scripts pressed gently into place by time, by tide, by stillness. This is the language of sediment, unreadable at first glance. But slowly, with patient eyes and careful hands, we begin to translate. In these layers, we find climate, warm periods, etched in fine clay, cold ages marked by coarse grains, A sudden dark line of soot marks the moment a fire raged, or a meteor struck, or an empire burned. Each layer a breath of the planet, each shift a change in wind, a redirection of water, a birth or death of ice, and beneath that, older layers still, 1,000,000 years ago, the ocean floor was somewhere else. The continents had not yet gathered their current names, and yet even then, the mud fell. The silt remembered. There is no silence in sediment, only slow speech. To hold a sediment core in your hand is to touch the quiet unfolding of time. It is to feel a world that speaks not in events but in accumulation. This is not history as told by humans. It is deeper, impartial, immense. Sediment does not prioritize. It does not forget what falls, remains. What remains, settles. And what settles, tells. We read its isotopes, its grains, its colors. We find the pollen of plants that no longer bloom. We find traces of metals from times when mountains first rose. We find the carbon signatures of ancient extinction. And in the most recent layers, we find ourselves plastic fragments, fly ash, synthetic chemicals, the sharp fingerprint of the Anthropocene. Even now, the ocean is writing us into the record, not with judgment, just inclusion. We are part of the layer, part of the unfolding, and in that realization, there is both awe and humility, because sediment is the memory we cannot edit. We do not get to rewrite its pages. We can only read them and wonder what future hands might find when they split the layers open, when they read the colors of our time, when they ask, what did they know? What did they remember? And what did they choose to forget? Even above the sea, sediment tells, in lake beds, in river mouths, in dry basins, where oceans once spread wide. Everywhere, the earth is writing. Always, it is remembering. And the language it uses has no vowels, no grammar, only texture, only depth. But it speaks softly, clearly, endlessly. And yet, if the earth speaks in particles, what truths might we still be missing, simply because we have not yet learned how to listen deeply enough? There are rivers that do not flow on land, they do not shimmer in sunlight, do not carve valleys, do not flood with rain, and yet they move more water than all surface rivers combined. They are the ocean's deep currents, invisible conveyor belts of heat, of salt, of time. They begin not with thunder, but with cold. At the poles, seawater cools until it becomes denser than the water beneath it. When it freezes, the salt is left behind, sinking downward, pulling whole masses of water with it, a plunge of brine into abyss. This descent begins a journey that spans centuries. The water moves slowly, hugging the seafloor, sweeping past continents, curling around trenches, rising only after crossing whole oceans. It is called the thermo-haline circulation. Thermo for temperature, haline for salt. It is the pulse of the deep sea, a planetary breath that loops around the globe, linking Arctic to equator, Atlantic to Pacific, surface to abyss. And though we cannot see it, it shapes everything. It brings nutrients up from the dark, feeding the phytoplankton forests. It carries oxygen into the deep, allowing life to survive miles beneath the waves. It redistributes warmth, aiding monsoons, calming winters, holding back deserts. It is memory in motion, a loop that began before we stood upright, that continues even now, curling through blue corridors below our ships and satellites. But that motion is slowing. Ice melts faster now. Fresh water from glaciers dilutes the salt. Without salt, the water loses its weight. Without weight, it does not sink. And without sinking, the cycle stutters. Already, some regions grow still. In the North Atlantic, in parts of the Southern Ocean, circulation weakens. The conveyor falters. The deep river forgets its rhythm. And the sea begins to change. Waters grow warmer at depth. Nutrients fail to rise. Heat lingers near the surface. Storms grow more intense. Tropical rains shift. Arctic ice thins from beneath. All from a current we cannot see. All from a pattern that, until now, never asked for attention. Ancient sediments hold the evidence. Layers of mud that reveal how these currents once collapsed before. During the Younger Dryas, 12,000 years ago, the North Atlantic current paused, temperatures plunged, glaciers advanced again. It happened before, it can happen again. The ocean is not just a body, it is a memory engine. It moves to remember, it circulates to balance, and when that balance shifts, the past returns, not as myth, but as climate. The forgotten currents stir the sky, they change winds, they shape the seasons, and still they move, slow, deep, patient. A single loop of the thermohaline system can take 1,000 years to complete. The water that sinks today may not return to the surface until generations have passed. What else moves that slowly? What else carries memory across centuries and oceans? In these deep rivers, the earth speaks its long sentences, not in rush, but in certainty. They are the lullabies of continents, the whisper between poles, the ocean's quiet syntax, and yet, if even the sea's silence can be broken by a shift in salt and cold, what other ancient rhythms might now be pausing, unnoticed, unheard, until it is too late to remember how they once moved? There are lives in the ocean that have not changed in hundreds of millions of years, creatures that do not belong to this world of cities and carbon, but still drift quietly within it. Not relics, not fossils, but survivors. The horseshoe crab, the chambered nautilus, the coelacanth, ancient bodies shaped by ancient seas, still moving, still breathing, still remembering. They have outlived empires, outlived the rise and fall of continents, outlived the splitting of Pangaea, the opening of the Atlantic, the great extinctions that erased most of their neighbors. Their forms have remained not because they resisted time, but because they matched it. A slow, steady rhythm, a body that worked well enough, a life tuned not to speed but to survival. The horseshoe crab, with its helmet of bronze and legs like quiet scissors, crawls the same tidal flats it knew in the Ordovician, its blood bright blue with copper, now used in medicine, a life-saving fluid from a body born before the dinosaurs. The nautilus, coiled in its perfect spiral, rises and falls through the water column each day, using chambers filled with gas to float, like a thought drifting upward. Its eyes are primitive, but its design, unchanged for over 400 million years, is a blueprint written in pressure and patience. And the coelacanth, once thought extinct, was found again in the 20th century, hovering in volcanic slopes near Madagascar, a fish with lobed fins, halfway to legs, a forgotten chapter in evolution, still swimming. These creatures are not ghosts, they are echoes, but echoes that continue to speak. They remind us that survival is not always about progress, that time does not always demand change. They have seen the earth reborn many times. They watched as skies thickened and cleared, as continents drifted, as ice advanced, as fire fell from space, and through it all, they endured, not above, but below, where change came slowly, where silence gave shelter. They are archives in motion, living fossils. Their bodies carry stories we no longer tell. We study them, sequence their genomes, trace their family trees back to a time when there were no trees at all, and still they move. They do not dominate. They do not strive. They exist, and that in a world so full of urgency is a form of wisdom. The ocean holds many such survivors, microbes in thermal vents, sponges older than stone, sharks that remember the last ice age in their blood. They teach us that time is not always a march. Sometimes it is a spiral, a drift, a circle. The nautilus knows this. Its shell grows outward in perfect proportion, each chamber a memory of where it once was, a space it no longer needs. We too carry such chambers, in our bones, in our stories, in the long arc of evolution that brought us here. And when we meet these creatures, in tide pools, in submarines, in pages of study, we meet ourselves, not as we are, but as we were, as something simpler, something still learning how to become. And yet, if such quiet lives can echo across eons unchanged, what might our own forms carry forward, if we too chose to move with the patience of the sea? Some memories don't linger in books or bones, they crystallize in smaller places, quieter ones, like the curve of a shell, a spiral of calcium drawn slowly from the water, layered with time and temperature, written in silence, inside these shells, from mollusks, clams, foraminifera. The sky has left its fingerprints, isotopes. Oxygen exists in different forms, light and heavy, O16 and O18, woven into water, into air, into breath. When an animal builds its shell, it pulls from seawater, and what it builds is shaped by what the sky was doing at that time. In cold eras, more O16 is locked away in ice. The sea becomes heavier. The shells record it. In warm periods, the ice melts, and the isotopes shift again. And so layer by layer, shell by shell, we read not just the temperature, but the feeling of ancient skies, a humid day in the Eocene, a sudden chill in the Holocene, a 1,000-year drought, curled into the lip of a scallop. Calcium becomes climate. Paleontology becomes meteorology. We do not need satellite data to know what the air once held. We need only the patient spiral of an ocean snail, drawn from a sediment core, read like a sentence from a forgotten dialect. And it is not only temperature. Carbon isotopes tell us about forests, about fires, about the rise and fall of photosynthesis. Nitrogen reveals nutrient levels, the health of ancient oceans. Strontium can tell us how fast rivers ran from the mountains, how much erosion carved from young terrain. In the chemistry of shells, we find echoes of cloud, pressure, storm. We find the scent of the sky, not in air, but in mineral. Even now, living mollusks carry this language. Their growing edges shift with seasons, their colors ripple with salinity and pH. Each ring is a calendar, each ridge a note in the wind's diary. A bivalve that lived for decades holds a record of El Niño, of monsoon, of heat waves. We are only learning how to read this. Each isotope, each ratio, a symbol in a slow grammar that tells us where we've been, and perhaps where we are going, because we are changing the sky again. The carbon we burn is changing the isotopic balance. The ocean absorbs it. The shells respond. Their chemistry shifts. One day, a scientist will hold a shell from today and see the spike. They will read the moment we turned air into burden. They will see it in the calcium. And maybe they will understand something we did not. The ocean has always remembered the sky, in waves, in color, and in shells, even long after clouds have vanished, after winds have shifted. The animals that lived in silence will tell us what the air once felt like, how heavy it was, how sharp, how clear, because the shell does not lie. It is not shaped by opinion. It is shaped by molecules, and molecules carry memory the way rivers carry dust, quietly, invisibly, but everywhere. We walk beaches strewn with fragments. We hold them to our ears and imagine the sea. But what we're hearing is more than wave. It is weather. It is history. A shell is the earth's breath, caught in spiral, the sky crystallized. And yet, if even the air can be recorded in the curl of a shell, what other fleeting sensations, scents, breezes, forgotten warmth, might still be waiting in mineral form, ready to speak if we learn how to listen? There is a force so soft, so constant, we almost forget it's there. It does not roar or crash. It does not burn or freeze. It pulls a quiet hand on the oceans, on every drop of water, on every grain of tide. Gravity, not just the Earth's but the Moon's, our solitary satellite, its pale face rising in silence, night after night, is more than a witness. It is a choreographer. It moves the oceans not by command, but by rhythm. Not with power, but with presence. The Moon's gravity tugs at the Earth's waters, raising them gently toward it, as if lifting the hem of a sleeping planet. On the opposite side, inertia swells a second tide, and so the sea stretches, twice each day, in a long breath of longing. This pull is ancient. It began when the Earth was still molten, when the Moon had only just been born, a piece of us broken off by impact, now circling like a memory that never fully left. And in that circling, the Moon has slowed us. Friction from tidal movement has lengthened our days, 1 second at a time. The Earth once spun so fast that days were only hours, now 24, later longer. We owe the pacing of our lives to the Moon's pull, to its quiet refusal to let us rush. This gentle friction writes itself into the rock. In places where tide met clay millions of years ago, we find laminated sediment, tidal rhythmites, dark light, each line a cycle, each cycle a clock. From these we read not just the Moon's age, but its influence. We learn how tides changed. We learn how the Moon drifts away a few centimeters each year, pulling slowly into distance, and yet its bond remains. It still holds our oceans in sway, still directs coral spawning, still guides the migration of crabs and fish, still inspires the rhythms of life. The Moon's presence turns gravity into grace. It transforms what might be still into dance. Tides lap at shores like lullabies. Waves curl in time with lunar breath. Estuaries breathe in and out. Salt marshes fill and empty. Even sand responds. Ripples form and flatten. Patterns repeat, traced by moonlight and water. And above it all, the Moon watches, a mirror not just of sunlight, but of pull, of pacing, of presence. We've walked on it now, touched its dust, left footprints where no wind will ever erase them, but still it moves us. And not just water, human sleep, tied to its cycles, the blood tide of women, mirroring its orbit, our myths, our calendars, our stories, all pulled gently by its gravity. It is not loud, but it is lasting. In a universe of explosions and collapse, the Moon is quiet, persistent, soft, and yet it shapes our planet more profoundly than any storm. Without it, our tides would fade, our seasons shift wildly, our days lose their rhythm. The Earth would spin more quickly, tilt more erratically. Life would struggle to keep its place, and so we owe the Moon our balance. We owe it our rhythm, a lullaby we did not write, but one we have always followed. It continues, even as we change, even as ice melts and sea levels rise and shorelines redraw themselves. The Moon still pulls, still sways, still waits. And yet, if this quiet choreography has shaped the tides for billions of years, what other hidden dancers might still be moving with us, guiding our lives in silence, one pull at a time? But not all of Earth's rhythms are gentle. Some arrive with no warning, sudden, bright, and absolute. There was a day long ago when the sky fell, not as rain, but as fire. An asteroid 6 miles wide entered the atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour. It was not a descent. It was an arrival immediate, unforgiving. It struck the sea, near what is now the Yucatan. The force of it was beyond imagination. Mountains turned to vapor. Oceans surged like walls. Sky became flame. In that instant, stone turned to plasma. Seawater exploded into steam. The atmosphere filled with ejecta, dust droplets, fragments of molten earth, thrown upward in a great plume. And then came the glass. Not window glass, not sand, but tektite, small, glassy beads formed when rock melts, is flung skyward, and cools as it falls. It rained for hours, for miles in every direction. Tiny spheres of silica and iron, glowing as they fell, blanketing the land, sinking into ocean. It was beautiful and devastating, the kind of beauty that cannot be witnessed, only found, later buried in ash. This was the end of the Cretaceous, the end of the dinosaurs, the end of so many, but not the end of memory, because we still find that glass scattered across the world, in thin layers of clay, between older and newer stone, a dark band, rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth, but common in asteroids. It is a line we can touch, a before and after pressed into time. Beneath it, fossils of ammonites, of ferns, of great reptiles. Above it, the world beginning again. The rain of glass marked not just extinction, but transition, the sky shattered and reassembled, the air filled with ash, and then cleared. The world cooled, then warmed, then found its breath again, and life, against all odds, persisted. Tiny mammals in burrows, seeds in soil, fish in the depths. From fire, from loss, the earth continued. The rain of glass was not the first, and may not be the last. There are other craters, other scars, other days when the sky has kissed the sea and left behind heat, darkness, and the strange beauty of transformation. But what remains is not only ruin, it is story, it is trace. The tektites are found in caves, in riverbeds, on mountaintops, little beads of memory, smooth and dark, as if the sky had cried and left behind tears that would never melt. We hold them now. We study their shape, their chemistry, their placement. They tell us how high the plume rose, how wide the dust spread, how quickly the planet responded, and how, even after the worst, the Earth has always returned to balance. Maybe that is what the glass remembers most, not the impact, but the quiet after, not the fire, but the breath that followed it, not the shattering, but the reassembly. And yet, if even glass can fall from the sky and carry memory into stone, what other fragile things, moments, lives, futures might endure through the fire, waiting to be found again in the calm after fire, in the silence beneath storms? There is a medium that remembers more than we can hear, not pages, not fossils, not sediment, but sound. The ocean forgets nothing. Beneath the surface, sound travels farther, faster, truer, waves of pressure moving through molecules in water that is denser than air, quieter than wind, older than language. Even a whisper becomes a map. Even a cry becomes a thread through time. Here in the vast and dim halls of the sea, sound becomes architecture, a whale song, low, pulsing, folded in on itself like breath, can travel hundreds of miles, a single note, spanning basins, a message cast not for one but for many. These are not just sounds, they are coordinates, calls to mate, calls to feed, calls to remember, and the ocean remembers. Sound waves bounce and bend through layers of temperature and salinity, finding channels that carry them further still, so far layers they are called natural waveguides that hold sound like a tunnel. In these layers, the splash of an iceberg calving in Antarctica can echo to the equator. The hum of a ship's propeller can blur the hearing of creatures 100 miles away. Even silence carries information. The absence of sound where once there was chorus tells of migration lost, of coral death, of frequencies drowned out by engines and drills, sonar, seismic testing, depth charges, all carve their own scars into the water, leaving behind trails of noise that linger long after they fade from human ears. But some sounds last longer still. Hydrophones dropped into the deep have recorded the aftershocks of ancient landslides, the groan of shifting plates, the distant bell of underwater eruptions, and once a sound known only as the bloop was heard across the Pacific. Low, massive, inexplicable. We later found it was ice breaking, but the mystery lingered, because in the ocean, sound is the one thing that cannot hide. Light dims, Color fades, form dissolves, but sound persists. It folds into the shape of water. It echoes off ridges. It rebounds through trenches, and sometimes it is recorded by the most delicate of instruments, the ears of whales, the lateral lines of fish, the inner bones of creatures tuned to vibration. Long before we made microphones, the ocean had already learned to listen. Even shells record sound. Tiny pressure waves alter their growth, their curves and ridges responding to frequency, to movement, to pulse. Perhaps this is why the ocean feels alive, not just in movement, but in resonance. It vibrates with memory. Each wave carries within it the weight of every other, a cacophony of beginnings and endings, and we are part of it now. Our voices, our songs, our ships, our wars, all ripple outward. The detonation of bombs from decades ago can still be heard by sensitive instruments as faint pressure ghosts in deep basins. The engines of global commerce never sleep. Their vibrations hum beneath the hull of the sea like mechanical whales with no need for breath. And yet, life continues to sing. Humpbacks learn new songs each season, passing them across oceans. Blue whales still murmur in notes deeper than thunder. Dolphins click, chirp, call, naming each other in whistles. Each note a thread, each thread part of a net that holds the memory of the sea. So when we say the ocean is silent, we are only confessing how little we've learned to hear, because the ocean forgets nothing. It holds every sound, every echo, every breath that ever met its surface and passed below. And yet, if the ocean carries every note ever sung, what songs of ours buried, drifting, unspoken, might still be echoing there, waiting to be heard again in the deep? We think of orbit as motion, but it is also silence, the silence of repetition, of grace in motion, of balance. So steady we forget it. It is movement at all. The earth spins, not wildly, but gently, not in panic, but in rhythm. We move through space at thousands of kilometers per hour, around the sun, through the spiral arms of the galaxy, within a cosmic waltz too vast for our days to notice. And yet, the sea notices. It moves not only with wind and moon, but with the tilt of the planet, with the breath of the sun, with the long looping steps of orbital dance. We tilt on an axis. We wobble slowly, predictably, like a spinning top losing no energy, only changing its angle, its tempo. This axial tilt gives us seasons: summer solstice, winter hush, a pulse marked by light and recorded in ice, in corals, in the layers of lake beds. Even the shape of our orbit changes. It becomes more circular, then more oval, over cycles of tens of thousands of years. These are the Milankovitch cycles. Subtle shifts in orbit, tilt and wobble, that reshape the climate, turning glacial into temperate, dry into green. The oceans respond. When the tilt increases, polar regions melt. When the orbit shifts, monsoons shift with it. The sea level rises and falls, not just with ice, but with the Earth's quiet, turning through space. Currents deepen, coral reefs migrate, coastal lands are swallowed, then returned. It is not chaos, it is choreography. The ocean sways not just to the moon, but to the sun's distance, to the angle of incoming warmth, to the rhythm of time measured not in hours, but in millennia. Somewhere beneath this turning, a tide always follows. Somewhere in the silence of space, a pattern always continues. The earth is not still, but it is steady, and the sea knows this. We find its memory in the sediment cores, alternating bands of algae blooms and barren years, aligned with orbital shifts in the isotopic signatures of foraminifera shells, tracing cold centuries and warm pulses like the heartbeat of a planet spinning through shadow and light. Even ancient shorelines, now stranded far inland, speak of high tides from warmer orbits long forgotten. And through it all, the ocean has remained Earth's mirror, not only of sky, but of time. When the earth draws nearer to the sun, oceans bloom. When we tilt away, they retreat. And still, the earth spins. Day becomes night. Night becomes day. Not by accident, but by design. Even earthquakes, even volcanic flows are nudged by orbital gravity, the shifting weight of ice, the redistribution of ocean pressure. Space may seem empty, but it is not still, and the earth, for all its mass, moves like a dancer who never tires. We rarely feel it, but the sea does. Its swell is not always wind. Sometimes it is orbit. Sometimes it is the quiet rise of warmth as we lean closer to the sun's touch. This is not fearsome. It is beautiful. To live on a planet that does not tumble, but turns, that does not fall, but glides. The sea is not anxious about the future. It remembers orbits that changed it and returned, glacial, interglacial, flood, drought, a slow inhale, a long exhale, and through each cycle, life adapted, continents reshaped. The ocean adjusted its rhythm. We are part of this turning. Each breath we take was first drawn by a fern beneath a brighter sun. Each drop we drink was once a tide on a warmer world. We are not separate from the orbit. We are the orbit, its children, its memory, its voice. And yet, if the Earth's quiet spin has guided oceans and life for eons, what deeper rhythm might we still be a part of? Barely aware, yet always moving to its song. There is a slow unraveling already underway. Not sudden, not loud, but sure, the soft melting of what once held the sky in place. Ice, the glaciers retreat, the poles bleed fresh water, the ancient white mirrors, high and low, begin to blur at their edges, and as they melt, something old begins to stir in the ocean. Not panic, not rage, but memory, because the sea has done this before. There was a time, many in fact, when the sky itself thickened with vapor, when warmth pulled moisture upward until clouds gathered, not in drifting flocks but in endless veils, heavy and permanent. The rain came not as storm but as surrender, and the oceans rose, not with fury but with remembering. Land drowned not all at once, but inch by inch, until ancient valleys became seafloor, until forests disappeared beneath sediment, until the sky lowered, returning its weight to the sea. It will happen again. We are living in the breath between glacial pulses, an interlude of relative balance, of briefly frozen mountaintops and icy caps, but the breath is exhaling. The warmth builds, and with it, the clouds will change. They will thicken, they will stay, and eventually they will fall. Not as rain, but as atmosphere returning. Humidity will rise, heavier than memory, and the air will begin to condense. Oceans will swell with the return of the sky. The air will lighten, not in color, but in mass. And in this transformation, the planet will shift once more. The sea, ever patient, will reach inland again. It will swallow the edges of maps. It will erase coastlines we once thought permanent. And in its rising, it will not roar. It will remember, because it has always held the sky within it. The clouds are not separate. They are borrowed, water on loan, carried above, until the cycle brings them back home. Even oxygen, first born in the sea, will find its way downward again, dissolved in waves, drawn into algal breath, settled into sediment. The sky will not fall in terror. It will return in rhythm. It has done this before. It will do so again, and the ocean, in receiving it, will not rise in rage. It will swell like a memory restored. Tides will find new boundaries. Coral will migrate. Currents will reroute. Life will adapt, as it always has. Perhaps we will not, or perhaps we will. But whether we remain or fade, the process will continue. For Earth is not fixed. It is fluid. Its states, air, ice, water, stone, move through each other, cycling slowly, as breath through lungs. To rise is not failure, to melt is not death, to return is not the end. And so when the sky begins to sink again, when clouds become sea, when the atmosphere folds into the arms of the tide, it will not be a disaster. It will be a remembering of a time when the world was warmer, wetter, newer, of an age that will come again. And yet, if the sky is only ever borrowed from the ocean, what else have we mistaken for permanence, when all along it was simply passing through? The ocean is not an ending, it is a beginning, folded back on itself, a spiral of return, a vessel for everything that ever fell, rose, drifted, dissolved. It remembers what the sky once was, before clouds were names, before air held breath. It remembers the first hydrogen, the oxygen coaxed from light by drifting cells. It remembers when rain was still molten, when rivers had not yet chosen a path. This is not just water, it is time liquefied. To float in it is to dissolve the boundary between body and planet, to feel the memory of sky cradling the skin, suspended in breath made liquid. The oceans have always been both archive and oracle. They hold what was lost and whisper what will return. Every drop carries stories of volcanic steam, of evaporated seas, of the quiet mist of prehistoric ferns. In the surface layer, the wind's reflection. In the deep, the weighted silence of fallen light. We may stand beside it, gaze across its immensity, but the truth is, we are never separate from it. Our blood echoes its salinity, our cells recall its chemistry, our lungs crave the oxygen it makes. We come from this water, not metaphorically, literally. Life began in its tide, was shaped by its currents, and when it walked onto land, it took the sea with it, in fluid, in breath, in memory. And still the ocean holds more. It holds the carbon we have poured into sky. It absorbs the heat we have stirred from fossil flame. It buffers, it balances. But it does not forget. It carries our age now, our technofossils, our drifting plastics, our chemistry. We are becoming part of its layers, its sediments, its currents. And even so, it makes room. It offers warmth to the poles. It offers breath to the forests. It offers food to the creatures of its margins and depths. The ocean is not angry. It is patient. It is vast in ways we do not yet understand. And it remembers, not with thought, but with rhythm, not with speech, but with swell, the slow curve of tide, the curl of a wave, the hush that follows retreat. To float here, truly float, is to drift through time, to feel the planet breathing around you, to know for a moment that you are suspended in something far older than fear, that every drop around you once drifted through clouds, once carved stone, once held the light of the sky. Even now, when we dive, when we sink beneath the surface, we enter a different gravity, a quieter one, as if falling into the lungs of the world. It is not silence, it is depth, and in that depth, a peace. Because here things move slowly, currents take centuries to return, whales sing across hemispheres, phytoplankton bloom and vanish like green thoughts rising. The ocean does not ask to be understood, only remembered, and it will remember us, not by our buildings, not by our machines, but by our breath, by the way we warmed the air, by the way we stirred the currents, by the traces we leave in coral, in chemistry, in tide. This is not judgment, it is continuity. We are part of the water now. We always have been, and when the sky sinks again, when the vapor returns, when the tide rises over what we built, it will not be an ending, it will be the next inhalation, because the oceans have always remembered the sky, and through them we remember too. And yet, if floating is the closest we come to timelessness, what else might we become when we finally stop resisting the current and allow the earth to carry us home?